Hello, 8th grade. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for the start of Chapter 17, The Civil War. Blue versus gray. Here we go. We're going to talk about the two sides. So, the division in the border states, Missouri, Kentucky, Delaware, Maryland, they remained in the Union during the war. They did not secede, even though they had allowed slavery. And because losing these border states would seriously damage the North, it's up to the government to take action here. So, Missouri controlled parts of the Mississippi River, Kentucky controlled parts of the Ohio River, and Delaware was close to the cities of Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., lay within the boundaries of Maryland. So, protecting these valuable assets became one of the first priorities at the start of the war in 1861. West Virginia at one point in time was a part of regular Virginia, but there were people in the West that sided with the Union, and thus they made a decision to secede and join the North. And thus we have the brand new state of West Virginia that kind of comes out of this war. And as you can see, there's going to be different types of movement in the West. You're going to see the Northern troops or the Union troops try to push down and push up the Mississippi River. You're going to also see troops moving from, the Ohio River into Kentucky and eventually into Tennessee, while the Confederates are going to try to hold positions within Virginia. So the North had a larger population, and that obviously proved to be a huge strength for them. They had more industry. They also had an abundant amount of resources. And resources in this case are everything from railroad lines to manufactured goods. So there were more boots, there were more guns, there were more mini balls, which are basically bullets, more cannons, more wool for uniforms. I mean, the North, they really, on paper, should have won this thing right away. Southerners were defending their land and their homes and their way of life. But individual southern states refused to give the Confederate government sufficient power. In a way, they were kind of living like America back in the time of the Articles of Confederation. And so every state was kind of sovereign, but this, overall Confederate government was really pretty loose, didn't have all the necessary powers that it needed to really get supplies and to mobilize troops the way they probably should have. So, goals of the war. In the North, the Union's plan for winning include gaining control of the Mississippi River. And during this, kind of era of time, kind of leading to the war, a guy named Winfield Scott, who happened to be one of the major generals, kind of Army Chief of Staff at the period of time, he came up with what they called the Anaconda Plan, which was kind of the belief that if the North could control the Mississippi River, that in time they could strangle the South from their resources and split the South in half, which eventually becomes kind of the game plan for winning this war, and it actually kind of plays out in the end. The South, their main aim was to be recognized as an independent nation, with the hopes that maybe countries like Great Britain and France would come and support them, not only with money, but maybe with troops on the ground. So, the Confederates' basic strategy was to conduct a defensive war by holding as much territory as possible and hope that the Union would get tired of fighting. In other words, like a war of attrition. And there were times where that seemed like it was playing out, especially when you talk about the war in the East along the Potomac River or the war that was happening in Virginia. It was rough. Okay. I mentioned Winfield Scott just a moment ago. He proposed the Anaconda Plan. And if you look at the political cartoon to the left, you can kind of see that big snake wrapping around the South. First, the Union would blockade southern ports, preventing goods from getting in or out. Second, the Union would gain control of the Mississippi River and then split the Confederacy in half. And then finally, cut southern supply lines. forcing the Union to be able to capture the Confederate capital of Richmond. It's all going to happen, but it's going to take time. So, average Americans or Americans against the war, the average age of a Civil War soldier was probably in their mid-20s, so we're probably talking 24, 25. Tens of thousands of soldiers were under the age of 18, some as young as 14, and in a few cases, as you can see in these photographs, perhaps even younger. Teenagers, there were some that ran away from home or they lied about their ages to join up with the military. Some of these younger guys that you see in the photographs, particularly the one Confederate fella here, may have been flag bearers or they may have been playing bugles or drums to set the cadence for marching. Jobs like that were kind of seen as maybe expendable, and thus, sometimes the flag bearer would get shot. So these poor kids, they had it rough. Who were Confederate soldiers? Well, Confederate soldiers were nicknamed rebels, sometimes known as Billy or Johnny Reb, as you can see in the infographic there. While some Union soldiers were called Yanks or Billy Yank, if you were kind of in the Deep South and you saw those blue coats, that's probably what you would call them. Soldiers came from every region of the country, so we had some that came from as far west as California, some even in the Nebraska territory. They also came from all walks of life. Half of the Union troops and about 60% of the Confederate troops had worked on farms because, most people at this period of time made their living in rural America and probably as farmers. So going off to fight a war, a lot of them, particularly in the South, they probably had their own rifles. They probably brought them from home, probably were not, necessarily unfamiliar with hunting. So they had skills, to fight in the war. But as far as like working as a team, that's up to their officers to train them to do that. By summer of 1861, the Confederate Army had about 112,000 soldiers. The Union outdid them by having 187,000 soldiers, and they were still recruiting. One of the things that they did in the North is immigrants were coming into harbors like Boston and New York. There would be recruiters waiting for these new immigrants at the docks and asking if they would like to join the military, and they would offer them money to do so. So the Union had a pretty decent supply of available men. And what's interesting is you're going to find certain brigades in the North that are going to be based on ethnicity. So there were several Irish brigades. There were some that were German, some that were Norwegian, depending upon where these immigrants were coming from. Okay, by the end of the war, about 900,000 men had fought for the Confederacy, and roughly 2.1 million men had been fighting for the Union. Just under 200,000 African Americans and about 10,000 Mexican Americans would also serve in the war. Now, looking at these numbers and maybe comparing them to, like, let's say World War II, you might not think that that's a big number, but in reality, this was the mobilization of a very large portion of the overall U.S. and Confederate populations at this period of time. So most people probably knew multiple individuals who were off fighting in the war. There was probably somebody from every family, most likely. So soldiers' life during the war, soldiers from both the North and the South, a lot of them lived in camps, which included moments where there would be songs, storytelling, maybe baseball games that would be happening. And if you look at the painting below that illustration, you'll see that. There would be marching, there would be drilling. There would also be really, really awful food. In the military, there was this food called hardtack, which if you could imagine like a soup cracker that was about a half an inch thick, that was like a biscuit. And a lot of times it was really stale. But what you would do is you would get that. It's kind of like your energy bar. You would eat that. And many times soldiers would also be given a ration of pork. So imagine having a hunk of bacon. And you didn't have refrigeration, so you'd be carrying that around in your rucksack, and in many cases it got moldy. Ooh. And some of the, the hardtack would also get weebles in it. So you'd get some really interesting things in your food. Many soldiers wrote home about what they were seeing, maybe their boredom, their discomfort, their sicknesses, because a lot of the camps, they had problems with water, and so dysentery and camp diseases like colds and things like smallpox and influenza and things like that, they were rampant. Some people wrote about their fear of going into combat. Some people wrote about the horrors that they saw in war. And they were very explicit. You didn't have a lot of censorship of the male. I mean, there was some, but there wasn't like it would be maybe in the First and Second World Wars. Okay. Horrors of war, thousands of casualties, and overwhelmed medical facilities. You had new rifles that were issued in the North, and they were rifled barrels. They were not like the old muskets that you had the musket ball that you ramrod. Instead, we're using what we call mini balls, and the rifled barrel, which is kind of like a spiral groove, made these weapons pretty accurate. I mean, as far as their ability to aim at a target and to hit the target. So the accuracy was great, and as a result, soldiers deserted armies because of the carnage that they saw, the fear, the hunger, the sickness that they suffered. And if they got caught for deserting, the punishment was execution in many cases. So you didn't want to get caught if you were running away from home, because they'd probably bring you back and put you in front of a firing squad or hang you for doing that. All right. Thank you very much.